Welcome to Hacking Your ADHD. I'm your host, William Kerb, and I have ADHD. On this podcast, I dig into the tools, tactics, and best practices to help you work with your ADHD brain. Hey team, I've recently been seeing a lot more stuff around the concept of dopamine fasting. Now, I'm going to start by saying that I'm entering this conversation with a little bit of trepidation because it comes from the side of the internet that, well, they tend to have good intentions, but this basically amounts to bro science despite the backing that it does have. So the idea behind dopamine fasting is to reduce or eliminate activities that provide instant gratification and a quick release of dopamine. So someone going through a dopamine fast might give up using their phone, watching TV, video games, junk food, and alcohol, plus anything else they see as their go-to dopamine activities, for say a 24-hour period. The idea here is that because we've glutted our brains on all these easy dopamine activities, we want to try and reset the process to regain a more sensitive system that isn't seeking that quick hit all the time. In today's episode, we'll break down this concept and examine whether it works, hint, I've already called it bro science, and what, if anything, we can still gain from the ideas. If you'd like to follow along on the show notes page, you can find that at hackingyyouradhd.com/190. One of the ways I try and stay in control of my day is by streamlining my decisions. When I've got a lot of moving parts going on, I don't want to get distracted and miss something important. And what helps me stay streamlined with my morning is starting my day with AG1. It ensures I'm taking care of my body's needs without any extra effort. AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that provides daily nutrients and supports gut health. AG1 has been a staple in my daily routine long before they became a podcast sponsor because, for AG1, quality isn't just a word, it's a commitment. This commitment is supported by expert-led scientific research, high-quality ingredients, industry-leading manufacturing, and rigorous testing. AG1 consistently exceeds industry standards at every step of the process. Because it's so easy to add into my routine, I don't have to worry that I'm forgetting about what my body needs. I appreciate knowing that I'm taking care of my body, and a recent study showed that AG1 doubled the amount of healthy gut bacteria, including 2 species known for supporting gut and overall health. Taking care of my health shouldn't be complicated, and AG1 simplifies this. If there's one product I trust to support my whole body health, it's AG1, and that's why I've partnered with them for so long. It's easy and satisfying to start your journey with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/ADHD. That's drinkag1.com/ADHD. Check it out. I also wanted to let you know about the Hacking Your ADHD newsletter, Any and All Distractions. And that's what this newsletter is all about. In it, I bring you the top things of the week that have caught my attention from the world of ADHD and beyond. If that sounds like something you'd like in your inbox, just head over to hackingyyouradhd.com/newsletter and sign up. All right, keep on listening to find out how fast you need to be going to fast from dopamine. To get started, let's first talk a little bit about what dopamine is. Dopamine is a neuromodulator that plays a critical role in the brain and plays a key role in a number of ways, including motivation, pleasure, and reinforcement of learning. It is often referred to as the feel-good chemical, although many scientists argue that this is far too simplistic a view of the molecule. This is because dopamine plays such a ubiquitous role in our lives. Part of the problem with the idea of dopamine fasting is just the wording itself, because you aren't actually limiting your intake of dopamine. Dopamine is a molecule that we get through nearly everything that we do throughout our day. While doing a little bit of additional research for this piece, I was having more trouble actually finding things that didn't provide dopamine than things that did. Typically, the things we expect not to produce dopamine are the things that we find the least stimulating. Think about repetitive tasks, or tasks where you're not doing anything, like just standing in line, or maybe something like just filling out a form. But even in that realm of non-stimulating activities, research shows we do get boosts of dopamine from things like meditation, which classically is a very non-stimulating activity. The point being that the road to reducing your dopamine intake is a complicated one. With that said, there are certainly a lot of things that are the heavier hitters. Exercise and physical activity are one of the most potent ways to boost your dopamine. We also see similar boosts through things like music, games, positive social interactions, food, and novel experiences. And these boosts can spike even more strongly if we combine these activities. Sports are a great example where we see physical activity, hopefully playing something fun, and often with social interaction. Similarly, I often mention how we can pair something stimulating with something we don't enjoy doing to help us get through the task, like listening to music while doing the dishes. This is because dopamine is believed to play a large role in ADHD, with some research pointing to low levels of dopamine contributing to the disorder. The best example I've heard involves imagining that your available dopamine is like a bucket. When you do some action that gives you dopamine, you fill the bucket. Over time, the dopamine will slowly leak out of the bucket, so you have to do more things to refill your dopamine. But with ADHD, there's a bunch of holes in your bucket, so your dopamine drains out far more quickly. However, there is still a lot of research that needs to be done regarding ADHD and dopamine. While it does appear that there is some kind of link between dopamine levels and ADHD, what exactly that link is still needs to be worked out. So while the bucket metaphor is a useful tool for thinking about how we operate with our dopamine, make sure that you're also taking it with a grain of salt. I think this is also important to keep in mind while we're talking about dopamine fasting because it's also something that isn't exactly scientifically validated either. The point is that using an unproven technique to solve an ill-defined problem is, well, there will be some sort of results, but who knows what they're going to be. So the hypothesis behind dopamine fasting is that we have so many sources of dopamine hitting our system constantly that we are constantly spiking our dopamine levels. When we try to do something that would just give us a normal level of dopamine, we're no longer able to enjoy it because it's so much less stimulating than what we've conditioned ourselves to normally get. Basically, we're desensitizing our brain's reward system, and we find that we can't enjoy the everyday pleasures of life anymore. A dopamine fast, where we detox our system by temporarily cutting out all the super high dopamine activities, is supposed to help us reset our reward system and enjoy those everyday activities again. For many people, it can feel like they can't enjoy everyday activities anymore, and so the idea like a reset seems just like what we need. But we have to look at what the science actually says here, rather than what internet bros are claiming. There is some evidence that chronic overstimulation can lead to some levels of desensitization. This makes sense when we think of something like drug use, where users need to increase their dose to reach the same level of high. But of course, it's also important to remember that dopamine isn't a drug, and the studies that have looked at this desensitization have mostly looked at the more extreme cases. Although I feel like I absolutely see this with some of the ways we're interacting with things like social media. One of the reasons that I haven't done much with this podcast in social media is that the platforms typically focus heavily on what keeps a user on the platform. They don't want to push content that encourages the user to go elsewhere. So this means that it wants creators to create content with their platform in mind. This doesn't exactly mesh with what I'm trying to do, so I haven't been working particularly hard to push things on my social. But the point here is that because of this push for social engagement on the platform, we get these bite-sized pieces of highly palatable content designed to keep you there. Of course, every platform has its own aims on how it wants to capture your attention, but in the end, it's all about pushing our dopamine levers in ways that make us want to stick around longer. And it can be hard for real life to compete with that. But I also want to be clear that just because these systems exist, it doesn't mean that we can't do anything about them. I mean, I think in some ways our ADHD can help here because we also have this drive for novelty. And while things like social media can mimic some of that novelty with, hey, what's this next post going to be? I also find that it can be incredibly easy for me to get bored of scrolling and then seek out something that is more stimulating. The real threat we get from scrolling is just how easy it is. With any amount of boredom, I can whip out my phone and open whichever app I think will best entertain me at the time. And I think this is where my issue with the idea of dopamine fasting really comes from, is that it feels a lot like we're looking at the symptoms of what's happening and addressing those rather than trying to fix any of the things that led to the symptoms. It's like taking a vacation to solve burnout. Sure, it will probably help, but when you get back from vacation and jump back into things with all those bad work habits that led to the burnout, you're going to find yourself needing a vacation again real soon. And I see the same thing with the dopamine fast. While it may feel like it's addressing what's going on, it's not actually solving for any of the bad habits that led us to feeling like we need the fast. Perhaps you could look at it as just regular maintenance you need to perform on yourself, but I think we'd have more luck working on modulating our behavior. Looking at those things that we might want to give up in a dopamine fast and trying to figure out ways that they can exist in our lives, but in a healthier manner. While there are plenty of ways to get our dopamine through healthy activities like exercise, listening to music, social interaction, spending time in nature, and getting good sleep, there are also a ton of ways that we can get dopamine through things that we don't want to encourage. Junk food, gambling, pornography, and drug use are just a few examples. And then you have a number that are more on the fence. Retail therapy can be fine in moderation, if and when you have the money for it, of course. But then in excess, if you're spending your rent to buy some new shoes, it's definitely a problem. Thrill-seeking can be great if you're riding a roller coaster, but it can also come out as reckless behavior that will have some serious consequences. I think part of our disconnect can come from the fact that we are often understimulated, and so we do seek that extra stimulation. As I mentioned before, most of us have this dopamine roulette machine in our pocket that we can pull out at any moment of boredom. This is a problem because these devices take up way more of attention than we think they do. We see this in action from distracted driving and phones at the dinner table to missing the funny part to our favorite TV show because we're scrolling on Instagram at the same time. Now, I don't want this episode to turn into me demonizing phones. I mean, I imagine most of you are listening and doing so on your phone. Actually, I have data analytics that backs that up, so I don't even need to imagine. But I do think it's worth us thinking about how and when we're interacting with our phones. But, and this is going to be a big but, this is also not something where we want to just be relying on willpower and going, well, I'll just not look at my phone quite as much, and we'll call it good. This is about setting limits and maybe not keeping your phone on your person at all times. It's about setting up your apps so that they do keep you from just logging on with no resistance. It's about giving yourself other options for increasing stimulation when you need it. Fidget toys are a great option here. I personally love infinity cubes, also rocks. Yeah, just straight up rolling a rock in my hand. Feels great and works as a great fidget. Or maybe you can doodle while watching TV, or maybe fold some laundry, do some knitting, or some stretching, adult coloring books, jigsaw puzzles. The point being that we have a ton of options available for us that, if we set them up ahead of time, can make it so that we don't fall into our habit of just pulling out our phones at the first piece of boredom. Overall, the idea of dopamine fasting is what I find to be an oversimplification of a complex reward system in our brains. And I do want to say I think there is some value that we can get from abstaining from something for a period of time. Maybe you do want to take a break from all these dopamine-laden activities to get a better sense of what they're bringing to your life. But I think the dopamine piece of something like a technology fast is wildly overrated, and that the real value comes with how you are trying to reclaim your time. Thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end. Before you go, though, let's do a quick rundown of today's top tips. 1. When dopamine fasting, you are trying to reduce or eliminate activities like watching TV, playing video games, eating junk food, and drinking alcohol that would give you that quick release of dopamine. While there may be some benefits to abstaining from these activities, the idea of doing a dopamine fast to reset your system doesn't hold much water. 2. Instead of trying to use a dopamine fast to create a quick fix, it's better to examine your habits and daily activities that led you to feel like you need this reset, and then seeing how you can modulate those activities for a healthier lifestyle. 3. With ADHD, we are often understimulated, and by doing something slightly stimulating, like playing with a fidget toy, you can help improve your focus and concentration. Just make sure you're not going too far and overstimulating yourself. That's it. Thanks for listening. I'd love to hear what you thought of this episode. Feel free to connect with me over at hackingYourADHD.com/contact. If you'd like links, you can go to the show notes page at hackingYourADHD.com/190. And now for your moment of dad. What do you call a detective who solves cases by accident? Sherlock Holmes.